أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين باعث الأنبياء والمرسلين صلى الله وسلم عليك يا رسول الله صلى الله وسلم عليك يا نبي الله وعلى آل بيتك الطيبين الطاهرين صلى الله وسلم عليك يا أبا عبد الله يا ابن رسول الله يا رحمة الله الواسعة ويا باب نجاة الأمة يا غريب يا غريب يا مظلوم كربلاء ما خاب من تمسك بكم وأمن من لجأ إليكم فيا ليتنا كنا معكم سادتي فنفوز والله فوزا عظيما. قال الله تبارك وتعالى وهو أصدق القائلين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ونفس وما سواها فألهمها فجورها وتقواها قد أفلح من زكاها وقد خاب من دساها. آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم. صل على وآل محمد. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. I begin in the name of Allah, the most kind, the most merciful. It's due to that kindness and mercy that we have these opportunities where we gather in remembrance and glorification of Him, Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. We then send our condolences to our living Imam, Ajalallahu Ta'ala Farajahu Sharif, and to each and every one of you as we commemorate the event of Arba'een of Aba Abdullah al-Husayn alayhim afdalu salatu wassalam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. It's amazing how fast these days have gone by, that we have commemorated this for about 50 days now, where we pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He accept our azadari inshaAllah, and that we have gained enough insight in these days to try and become better believers inshaAllah. We've heard a lot of lectures, gained a tremendous amount of knowledge, and so I don't want to overload anything today. What I'd like to do is to maybe just highlight one particular area that if we focus our attention on and not let this and not let it just pass by, then inshallah what we have gained over these nights, there's great potential for it to last. And so I'm going to try to focus on that one particular area. And it starts by understanding our soul, the creation of our soul. When we are born, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives each and every one of us this gift, which is our soul. But He gives this to us pre-programmed with certain factors and certain things, but at the same time, this soul is in a state of potentiality, right? It's not actualized yet. And so what that means is that depending on what we expose our soul to, depending on the kind of life that we live, depending on the kind of upbringing we have, all of these factors play a huge role on our soul. It's like a plant, If you buy a plant from somewhere, that plant is in a state of potentiality, and depending on what the owner does with that plant, how it nurtures it, sunlight, water, all of these factors, the plant can either grow or it can die, right? And similarly, our soul is very similar. Depending on what we expose it to, this soul can blossom into something that we won't fully fathom until we meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the Day of Judgment, or until we're raised by Him on the Day of Judgment. And it can purify, and it can be the cause of our absolute success. Or if we don't nurture this soul, if we take it for granted, if we don't pursue the things that will enhance it, the soul will get corrupted, right? And that corrupted soul will be the cause of our failure. And this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala discusses in the verses that I read in the khutbah from Surah Al-Shams, right? وَنَفْسٍ وَمَا سَوَّاهَا. He said, Allah says, and the soul and He who proportioned it. فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا. And then He inspired this soul with fujur and taqwa, yeah, with things that can corrupt it and things that can enhance it. It can purify it. And so the soul is always receptive, always awake, always alive, and it can get both. So it's not that it can only get the good stuff. The soul has the capacity to receive the bad stuff if we allow it to be exposed to it. But then he says, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا. The one who is successful is the one who purifies it. And the one who fails is the one who lets it go and corrupts it. And so the soul is something we have to be mindful of. And so not only is it our responsibility to be mindful of this gift of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but on top of that, we have to be mindful of the playing ground that the soul lives in, right? We have to be mindful where this soul lives. And the soul lives in this worldly plane, right? And so we have to be really mindful of how this dunya works. You know, this dunya, even if a human being is very conscious about avoiding things which are haram, the soul, the dunya still has a way of suppressing the growth of the soul. Yeah, I want us to be mindful of the words I am choosing, right? The soul, we said, can grow or it can be restricted. The dunya has a way of restricting the soul even if I am not inclined towards something haram. As long as I am not enhancing it, I am restricting it. Yeah, and this is a point that I want to emphasize on, and we will discuss and show how that happens. But the dunya has a way of doing that, right? So if my gas is not on that accelerator and I've just kind of put it on cruise control, dunya will restrict my soul. Dunya will suppress my soul. And we see this in many examples, right? Like the most clearest example that always comes to my mind is that when we go for ziyarat, when we go for hajj, we are very spiritually charged. You know, while we're there, we come back with some of that flame within us, but it doesn't take long for us to regress back to who we were. Not that we were bad people, right? But it's just that extra motivation that I had of reading those extra du'as, those extra ziyarats, those extra salawat that we did, is not as much there. It's not because I'm bad, it's just dunya has a way of kind of restricting that, right? And so we have to be like super mindful of the platform in which the soul lives. Now there are many reasons why dunya does this, but we don't want to focus on that. But I can just list a few, right? Like exposure, constant exposure to values that counter our values has a way of desensitizing us. Religion becomes a habitual practice rather than the heartbeat of our existence, and so I just check off some boxes, think I'm alright. Well, the soul's not progressing with that. Yeah, the soul is just kind of stagnant when we do those things. The pursuit of material comfort, which is necessary, sometimes distracts us from pursuing spiritual strength, right? So all of these things are there and we have to be very cognizant of this, right? But at the same time, like, God doesn't leave us alone. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala counters these exposures of dunya with what I would call whispers or reminders that we can become better, right? These are sometimes, in certain ways, these whispers are awakenings, yeah? Awakening is what's known as yaqza. Yaqza is when I realize, like, oh, like my eyes open, but not these eyes, right? The eyes of the heart that, hey, I can do better. I can be better. I can try harder. These inspirations come from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in different ways, right? One way it comes are through gentle reminders. Just gentle reminders that every time I'm reminded to do a ma'roof, an act of goodness, man, that's just God wanting me to grow to become a better human being, right? So at night when I can't sleep and then something tells me just go and pray a 2 rakat salah. That's God's gentle reminder of allowing us to grow, right? You're leaving the bathroom and something tells you, just do wudu. And you're like, but I don't want to. But that's just God's way of reminding you to do something good. And so sometimes God whispers that to us. it's important that we don't ignore these whispers. Sometimes it may feel like an inconvenience, right? To shower, to do wudu, for example, or to come out of bed and go pray a 2 rakat salah. But try not to allow those voices to ignore those voices, because that's God's way of kind of just allowing us to grow and become better human beings. Sometimes that awakening or that reminder comes as a shock to our system, right? Sometimes when the life is just going, God has to put a roadblock in there because we're not mindful. Maybe we've ignored these whispers for long enough. Maybe we've ignored these inspirations for long enough. And so God puts something that shocks our system. We call that maybe like a rock bottom, when you hit a rock bottom, right? We all understand what a rock bottom is, right? Like you just hit a place where you're like, man, this place is horrible, right? Like I can't be like this and I have to rise above it. Sometimes it could be a call from the doctor. Sometimes it could be a death in the family. Sometimes it could be a near accident, for example. These are examples where God is just saying, hey, just wake up, right? Just wake up. God is just trying to wake us up. And that's really the power of God. Sometimes, I don't know, man, sometimes we feel God has left us, but it's really on those moments where God is waking us up, where God is saying, no, I'm here for you, but just become better. Sometimes these awakenings, they come through the opportunity to reflect on the examples of others. And this is where Karbala serves as that utmost example, right? Where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has chosen us as the lovers of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam as a yearly reminder that, hey man, look, there are so many paths out there. You can be on the wrong path if you're not careful. Look at the characteristics of the path of the people who were successful. And so God sends us these reminders. And this is why Karbala for us is an absolute gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. An absolute gift. One that, this is why even in Ziyarati Ashura, it's very interesting, right? The last in Sajda, what is Alhamdulillahi ala azimi raziyati. Man, that's such a powerful line, right? That all praises to Allah for the depth of sadness that I feel. SubhanAllah. We are thanking God for this raziyah. Yeah, we're thanking God for this hardship that we are experiencing. Why? Because, man, if you concentrate on it, it can be an awakening. It's very powerful. And this is why, I am a firm believer, absolute believer, that if we attended these gatherings with the right intentions, and if the speaker delivered with the right intentions, the result is absolute fireworks. Yeah, it can be absolute fireworks, but it depends on everyone's mindset, what we came in here with. And so in these gatherings, I am confident that there is at least one reminder that can inspire us, that can awaken us, that can make sure that we can at least focus on that. And when these things happen, when those reminders come, be it through the tragedy of Karbala, be it through an absolute shock to our system, or be it through a gentle reminder from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's really important that we do not ignore these reminders, right? In any of these instances. It's really, this happens to a lot of us, if I, for example, let's say I ate a dessert and now I'm sleeping and I'll be like, man, you can't eat like that. And then at night in my bed, I'll be like, yeah, tomorrow, wallah, I'm not going to eat it again. At night, we're very inspired. Tomorrow I'll work out, tomorrow I'll do this, tomorrow I'll pray, tomorrow, at night, we get all these lovely ideas, right? And then what happens? I just put in the back burner. And then the next night I'm reminded again, it's like, wallah, tomorrow, inshallah, yeah? What's important is that when we get these reminders, we don't put it on the back burner. We take the necessary steps forward, because it's for there to be change, there requires extreme effort is required. Extreme effort, right? And what we have to understand is that we are in the midst of a battle at this particular moment, an absolute battle, right? If we could look into our soul and see how this metaphysical dimension of existence that we live in is working, what we would see is that there is a battle taking place constantly, right? And if I am mindful of that battle, then I will see why extreme effort is required for there to be even the slightest change, right? So let's just describe this battle. We live in two existences. There is a physical existence that is experienced by the body. The body lives, this is all physical, right? And then there is the metaphysical existence, the spiritual existence, which is where the soul lives, right? So the soul, we don't see it as a physical entity because it's a spiritual entity. But the soul occupies both dimensions. It occupies the physical dimension, it's what gives us life. The body is just a vessel. And it exists in this metaphysical dimension where there's growth taking place or there's restriction taking place. But I don't see that, right? But what I have to believe is that this growth or restriction is constantly taking place. There is not a moment, just like in our physical world, like there's not a moment of stagnation or rest, right? Like even like if I'm just sitting, my heart is beating, isn't it? So there's always a physical movement. Spiritually too, right? Spiritually, you're not just at rest ever. You're either growing or you're restricting yourself. And what we have to do is we have to be mindful of that. So in this realm or in this existence that both occupies the physical and the spiritual, there are two hosts, right, that are fighting for domination. There is the divine host and then there are the satanic hosts. Right now, if I could see it, I would appreciate it, right? But I don't see it, maybe I take it for granted. But I want us to be mindful of what's taking place. There are these two hosts. The divine hosts are the hosts that are basically encouraging us towards developing noble characteristics. They are encouraging us to do good actions, to develop strong faith. So we have that inside of all of us. Oh, but you can do better, try harder. But then we also have those satanic forces. And the satanic forces are those forces that are trying to get us entirely on a different path, right? So it's these forces that are encouraging us to chase our desires, for example. Yeah, they give excuses to us. You'll change tomorrow. You're young, Allah will forgive you, right? And so we're getting all of these mixed messages within our system, and these two forces are constantly going at it. Like we have to be mindful of this. Like this is why, when we're in this path of balance, I would say, right? Like we want to be more on the good side, but when we're in this path of up and down like a seesaw, we'll get these really, I don't want to say it can be annoying, but it can be taxing, where you want to do something and a voice will say, don't do it. And you'll be like, just do it though. Be like, don't do it, right? Watch it, no, don't watch it, right? Say it, no, don't say it. Like these things that are happening within us, why? Because there's these two forces that are just giving messages constantly, right? And as long as at least we have the other counter side, we could say Alhamdulillah, because that voice is still there. But the more I pay attention to one of these forces, the stronger that force grows in strength. And eventually, if I have ignored the other voice long enough, that action that I'm doing will not bother me as much. Or the temptation won't be as strong depending on which voice I answer. You follow or no? Right? We all experience this. This is what's happening metaphysically to each and every one of us, right? We may call it conscience, we may call it habit, but these are just the worldly explanations. We're talking about how this battle is won, right? And so depending on who I give my attention to, that just grows stronger and stronger, and eventually that force will dominate, right? And at the same time, what I had mentioned earlier comes into play, that if I am, for example, not consciously developing myself to become better, right? But let's just say, but I'm not a sinner. In any way, I'm not a sinner, right? I do the wajib, I avoid the haram. But I am not developing myself daily. Why? Because I'm busy, right? I go to work from the morning, I come back in the evening, and we're not just talking about reading Quran, that's part of it. Praying extra salahs, not just that. Just being a good person, I was mean to somebody today. I yelled at a coworker. I yelled at somebody. I work on that. I try to become better. We're talking about holistically better, right? If I'm not striving to become better, then the satanic forces are winning because it's always in motion. So if I'm not going towards the divine forces, I am by default going towards satanic forces. And this is why the restriction we said of the soul takes place, right? Because we are constantly in movement. Movement means you are moving in one direction or the other. What the satanic forces have as an aid is that dunya will just make us busy. And so they rely on that knowledge that, look, this guy, maybe, this is why when we look at how shaitan influences us, and us, I mean us as believers, for many of us, shaitan knows that I can't get him to do something haram. I can't get her to do something haram. I know I can't. But what can shaitan do? Just make us lazy to become better. Yeah, that's all it wants to do. It just wants to make us lazy to become better. Because if we stop trying to get better, that hold is by the satanic forces at that time, and they have a greater chance of success. So keep all of these points in mind. Yeah, then when we talk about the need to become a better person, man, appreciate the war that's going on right now, and appreciate what we have to do. Now, the final point that I want to give you that is what I wanted to focus on is that these two forces, the battle is taking place in both realms, the material realm and the immaterial realm. And in the material realm, the weapons that they use are our extremities, the hands, the legs, the stomach, right? All of these things, like the tongue, the eyes, the ears, these are the weapons that they use to try and win. But the most important weapon that both of these forces are trying to win over is the mind. Yeah? Our imagination, our thoughts. If they gain mastery over the mind, they win, right? Because the mind, maybe we can synonymously use the word heart, right? But if it gets control of that, it knows it will produce the actions that it wants, right? And so what we have a real important responsibility of doing is ensuring that we are cognizant of what we expose our minds to at all times. At all times, right? There are things, as we said, that we live in this world that we will encounter values that are different than ours. True. But don't ever, let me put it better. We have to counter those values constantly. Constantly. If I don't counter those values, then those values become absorbed. This is important for our children who go to school and what they are taught. We have to counter those values. We have to. What we see, we have to counter those values. Today, shows have so many characters that are of different values. We have to make a decision that I don't care that this show is funny, but because they promote a particular value, I won't engage or watch this particular show. Will it restrict what we... Fine, that's fine. But I have to be constantly countering these values. And the more I control my exposures, and then this leads to, of course, other areas that maybe we'll touch upon again, is about developing a stronger mental health, right? So if I allow thoughts and ideas and even about my own self to become diminished and become, maybe can we say, negative, and that will have a dramatic impact on how much I can assign or align myself to divine forces. But we'll talk about that separately. The message that I want to give again, like I said for today, we've learned a lot. We've gotten this awakening that we can become better. But keep in mind that if I am not moving forward, the satanic forces are going to win, without a doubt, right? They're not going to send me to Jahannam, but at least they'll prevent my growth, right? And so I have to counter that. And I have to counter that by ensuring that my mind is exposed to the right things, right? And if I can do that more consistently, then inshallah the divine forces will win. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. These are the days in which we still remember the family of Rasulullah, peace and blessings be upon him and his family, reaching Karbala. And I know we heard the Masaib yesterday, but there are a couple of parts of this Masaib that I find very, very heart-wrenching, That when Jabir reaches Karbala, and when he gives his condolences to Abu Abdullah and he gives his salams to Abu Abdullah, soon after his companion Atiyah, he says, Jabir, I see flags coming from a distance. They didn't know who these flags were. And so Jabir says, Atiyah, go and see who they are. It might be the army of Ubaidullah bin Ziyad. And soon after, Atiyah comes back, and we're saying, some narrations say he slaps his face and says, Jabir, qum ya Jabir. That stand, Jabir. Because Imam as-Sajjad has come for the ziyarat of his father. And that is when Jabir looks at Imam as-Sajjad and he embraces him and he says, Sayyidi adamallahu lakal ajra bi abikal Husayn. That I give you my condolences, O Sayyidi, O my master, on the martyrdom of your father Hussein. It's this moment that breaks my heart, because in this entire journey, there have been very few people who have given condolences to our fourth Imam. There have been very few people who have come and shed a tear with our fourth Imam. Every time our Imam would cry, they would hit him with spears. He would not be allowed to look at the face of his father. And so to finally find someone who shared that love for his father, that when he would give condolences, I can imagine, my heart tells me the Imam breaks down. And this is why when you look at his words, he says, Ya Jabir, ha huna qutila Abu Abdillah. ها هنا ذبحت أطفال أبي يا جابر ها هنا والله قتلت رجالنا وسبيت نساؤنا وأخرقت خيامنا. Imam alayhi salam finally had people who would love and share that grief of his father. And this is why when we come back to Medina, when the poet Bashir goes into the city and he tells the people, come give your condolences to Imam as-Sajjad. One of the first people comes out is his uncle Muhammad bin Hanafiya. He comes out to Imam as-Sajjad and again embraces him. And he says, Yabna akhi, that the son of my brother. Aina akhi, aina qurrata aini, aina nuru basari. Where is the apple of my eye? Tell me what they did to my... Imam as-Sajjad alayhi salam replies back and says, Oh ya Amma, that I wish you were there on the plains of Karbala. That when my father cried out, is there not anyone to help me? He says, not a single person. No one came to help my father. He was ghareeb on the plains of Karbala. He says, Qutila wa huwa atshan. He died while he was thirsty, while these people would feed and give water to their animals. فَسَيَعْلَمُ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا أَيَّ مُنْقَلَبٍ يَنْقَلِبُونَ وَالْعَاقِبَةُ لِلْمُتَّقِينَ إِنَّا لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to hasten the return of our Imam. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive the sins of our parents and loved ones. That for those who are going through difficulty, that He end their difficulty. For those that have asked us to pray for them, Ya Allah, accept their hajat. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم. ماتم حسين.